Ladies and gentlemen, fight fans all around the world, let's talk some boxing. So we're continuing part 2 of the series Opposition of All-Time Greats. We're looking at Sugar Ray Robinson now, and we're going to look at, again, how many of the top 10 opposition he faced, who he actually beat. He had to beat them, of course. So let's begin with Sugar Ray Robinson's career. Of course, he began his career back in 1940. Alright, he debuted. And in 1940, he had 6 fights. And of those 6 fights, he faced some debutants, he faced some different fighters. Norman Quails was a very experienced fighter he faced, and Oliver White was pretty experienced. Okay. Now, we're going to look at the Ring Magazine again to see who the people were that he faced. Now, he started off his career at lightweight, actually. If you look here, he's a lightweight, see? So, for the first year, he was fighting lightweights. So we're going to look in the ring here at the lightweights and see if any of them are people that he faced. David Day, Sammy Angut, are any of these guys the guys he faced? And the answer is no. Oliver White, Quails, Woods, Crispo, Stafford, and Echevarria. None of those are the names here, okay? Alright, so let's move on. In the year 1941, he had 20 fights. That's quite a lot of fights, right? He faced Tony Iakovasi, who just had 1 fight in his career. Then he faced Frankie Wallace, who had a lot of fights. This is quite an experienced fighter, journeyman fighter. Then George Zengaris, Benny Cartagena, Bobby McIntyre, Gene Spencer, Jimmy Teague, I think this is Teague, Charlie Burns, Joe Gunley, Victor Truas, Nick Castiglione, Mike Evans, Pete Lelo, Sammy Angut. All of this was more or less at lightweight, just a little bit above lightweight. Carl Gugino. Now this is at junior lightweight, basically. Or, not junior lightweight, sorry, wasn't that what I'm talking about. Junior welterweight, or super lightweight, right? 139. Then you have Maurice Arnault, but they didn't have super lightweight back then. It was called welterweight. So these are kind of welterweight fights here. Not so much the Angut fight, these two here. So he's getting a little bigger, right? Even Pete Lelo, this is kind of close to welterweight. Back in the days, the welterweights were a little bit smaller than they are today. Yeah, they still had the top limit of 147, but, you know. Anyway, Maurice Arnault, Maxi Shapiro, Marty Servo, and Fritzy Zivic. Okay? So 20 fights. That's a lot of fights in a year. That's remarkable. A lot of fights. Okay? Let's see if any of these guys are listed in the rankings for 1941. Now, this is because it's the rankings at the end of the year 1940. So we're going to start off with some of the guys who were lightweights, and then we'll look at guys who were welterweights, okay? I see a name that stands out here, Pete Lelo. We saw Pete Lelo just a minute ago. Let me just show you. So here's Pete Lelo right here. Okay. Let's see if there's anybody else at lightweight. No. So that's number 1. Let's see what else we got here. Sammy Angut is another one. That's number 2. We just saw Sammy Angut again at lightweight. And he was the number 1 lightweight in the world at the time he faced him, which is really pretty remarkable. Let's see what else we have here. Carl Jr., Maurice Arnott, Maxi Shapiro, Marty Servo. Marty Servo. Check welterweight if you have to. You see a Marty Servo there? No? No? Burley was there, though. See Charlie Burley? There's a Kaplan. I don't really see any other names there. Let me see what else we got here. So, but Marty Servo was undefeated. He would later become welterweight champion of the world. Huh? Just by the way, Fritzy Zivic is the last one. I think Fritzy Zivic. Fritzy Zivik was actually welterweight champion the year before. At the end of 1941, he was welterweight champion. He lost his champion at the end of 1940. Sorry, at 1941 he lost his championship, and I do believe he faced Sugar Ray Robinson that same year. So it's very interesting. So he faced former world champions, and Sammy Angut, by the way. Let me see here. What's going on with Sammy Angut? Sammy Angut was the #1 contender. Yeah, actually, Lou Jenkins was the champion at the end of 1940. I think Sammy Angut beat Lou Jenkins in 1941. Yeah, in 1941 he beat him. I think he was world champion actually when Sugar Ray Robinson beat him. Well, that's interesting. So, Sugar Ray Robinson has 1, 2, and 3 notable names in 1941 out of his, let's see how many fights he had. 26. I think 20 fights, did I say? Yeah, 20 fights. Okay, so it's pretty impressive. All right, 1942. He faced Fritzy Zivik again. Let's get into 1942 here. He faced Fritzy Zivik. Notice he's a welterweight, a small welterweight, but he's a welterweight nonetheless. Fritzy Zivik was a little bit overweight. And remember, Fritzy Zivik was the year before, he was a world champion, and he lost the world championship the year, right in that same year, 1941, to a guy called Freddie Cochran. Okay? But nonetheless, he faced Fritzy Zivik again. They rematched each other. And this time, he definitively beat Fritzy Zivik, knocking him out in the 10th round. Went on to face Maxie Berger, Norman Rubio, Harvey Doves. All of these are welterweights. Dick Banner. Dick Banner was a debutant. And some of these are stay busy fights, okay? So don't think too hard about it. Faced Marty Servo again and Sammy Angut. This time this was a welterweight fight. Ruben Shank, Tony Matisi. All of these are welterweight fights. And then he faced Jake LaMotta. This is his first middleweight fight. So we have to look up at middleweight to see where Jake LaMotta stood in 1942. He then faced Izzy Janazzo. I think he faced Izzy Janazzo a couple times, actually. He also faced Vic Delicurti, and then he comes back and faces Izzy Janazzo again. All right. And finally, he faces Al Netlo. All right, he faces Al Netlo. That's his last fight. So he has one, actually. Oh, Vic Delicurti is also a middleweight fight. So you have 2 middleweight fights here that he had in that year, which is pretty crazy. Okay, so the point anyway is this. He had roughly 14 fights that year. Okay? 1942, he had 14 fights, a couple stay busy fights. But in the process of doing so, he faced Fritzy Zivik, Maxie Berger, Norman Rubio. These are all good fights. There's 3 fights, good fights in a row. And I don't know about these other guys. Then he faces Marty Servo, who's a good fighter because he became champion. And then he faces Sammy Angut, who was the lightweight champion. All right, I think he still was. I can't remember. And then he faced Jake LaMotta at middleweight. So this guy, he's fighting everybody. He's fighting lightweights, he's fighting welterweights, and he's fighting middleweights. You're thinking blown up lightweights, but still, very interesting stuff. Of course, this is not a full-fledged middleweight, but nonetheless, it's still interesting. All right. Today, if he was to face Jake LaMotta, it would still be a welterweight fight, because just so you understand, we'll be looking at the unofficial weigh-ins, right? But for the sake of this, since it was same day weigh-ins, LaMotta was a middleweight. They have Izzy Janazzo, Vic Delicurti, Izzy Janazzo again, and Netflow. All right, let's look and see in 1942 what we're talking about here. Now we got to look in the middleweight division. I look in the middleweight division. I don't see Jake LaMotta, so he wasn't prominent in the top 10 yet. Ezra Charles was there, Georgie Abrams, Tony Zale, Seferino Garcia was still around. I don't know. He was like the Ancient of Days dude. He was still holding it down. Steve Belwa. Now Belwa, I believe, and Georgie Abrams, Sugars, as he was called. I think these 2 guys faced Sugar Ray Robinson. All right. So anyway, we're looking at the welterweight division. We have 3 welterweights so far. I'm sorry, 3 top 10 fighters that Sugar Ray Robinson faced. Let's see how much more Okay, we already talked about Fritz Zivic, so we can't add him. Burley's still there. Holman Williams is still there. Izzy Janazzo, however, is one of them, so that's number 4. And we have Norman Rubio, that's number 5. 5 top 10 opponents, okay? Marty Silva was still not ranked up there. And Max Beer. Not Max Beer, what is it? Maxi Berger wasn't also ranked up there. Well, actually, Maxi Berger, unfortunately, it was a Canadian ranking, so you wouldn't find him because it was the Canadian system had super lightweight in it, but it wasn't so for globally, so you won't really find Maxi Berger there. But the point anyway is that we're now looking at 5 top 10 opponents that he faced so far. And so early in his career, he's facing some really, really good names. Some former world champions, some champions at the lower division, and some future champions. You know, so that's pretty good. Oh, and also he faced 2 middleweights in the process, which is exceptional. I just want to make these notes because you need to bear these things in mind when you're talking about Sugar Ray Robinson. That was 1942. Let's look at 1943. In 1943, he didn't fight as much. He was starting to fight higher competition as well. He faced Jake LaMotta again at middleweight. Then he came down and he faced California Jackie Wilson at welterweight. Okay. Then he rematched Jake LaMotta again at middleweight because he lost. So he rematched Jake LaMotta. Then he faced Freddie Cabral. This is another middleweight guy, small middleweight. Ralph Zanelli was a welterweight. Henry Armstrong at welterweight. Of course, Armstrong was a very small welterweight. Again, he faced Izzy Janasso, who was a medium-sized middleweight. Okay. Oops, that's in 1944. Sorry, my bad. So this is 1943. Let's see how many of these people in 1943 were top 10 guys. And some of them are middleweight, so you have to look at them here. And then you have to look at the welterweight division here. So let's see here. What do we have? Okay, so we are now at number 5, right? Okay, Jake LaMotta. That's a middleweight fight. So you go up here, and you see Jake LaMotta was number 6 middleweight in the world contender. So that's number 6. Then he faced California Jackie Wilson. And he was number 3 welterweight in the world. That's 7. And then, let's see, he faced Jake LaMotta again. Then he faced Freddie Cabral. I don't think he was ranked anything at middleweight. No. And he's not here at welterweight. Good, let's keep it going. And Ralph Zanelli. I can tell you Ralph Zanelli has to be ranked as a welterweight. And I am wrong. He is not. Okay. And then, he was a good fighter, though. Henry Armstrong is the next guy he fought. And Henry Armstrong was the number 2 welterweight in the world. He had lost, I think, the year before the title to Fritzy Zivic. And as you know, Fritzy Zivic himself, when Armstrong faced Fritzy Zivic, had already lost the title himself. So Henry Armstrong had actually lost the title quite a number of fights ago. We had to talk in terms of fights, not in terms of years. So he was on the downswing, but it doesn't matter. Henry Armstrong's another one. So that brings our total to LaMotta was 7, I think. California Jackie Wilson was 8. Am I right? Or is LaMotta 6? LaMotta 6. Okay. LaMotta 6. California Jackie Wilson 7. Henry Armstrong is 8. All right, 8. Let's see what else we have here. Yes, in 1943, that's basically it. All right, so he fought 1, 2, 3 notable names in 1943, which is pretty good. Oh, right, he kind of rematched one guy, but it's still pretty impressive. Okay, so we're at 8 right now. Let's look at 1944, shall we? In 1944, he fought 4 times. Now you'll notice that he's fighting less and less, and the reason being the competition is getting better and better, so you have to have less stay busy fights. So in 1944, he faces Izzy Janazzo, Lou Woods, Vic Delacurti, Sheik Rangel, and George Martin. It's actually a kind of weak year, but let's just have a look at it. So, in 1944, he faces Izzy Genazzo, Lou Woods, Vic Delacurti, Sheik Randall, George Martin. And when we look, Izzy Genazzo is one. Did we count? So we can count him. That's 9. That's about it, isn't it? Ain't nobody else. All right. So he takes a break this year, and he only fights one top 10 guy. All right, that's 9. Now in 1945, he fights a little bit more than he did in 1944. So in 1945, he faces Billy Ferrone, Tommy Bell, George Costner. That's Sugars, sorry. That's Sugars, not Georgie Abrams. Jake LaMotta, Jose Basora, that's a good fighter. But again, notice, he's faced 2 here middleweights. It's a small, you call this guy a super welterweight, but he's a super middleweight back then. And here's another guy, Jimmy McDaniels, who's a welterweight. Jimmy Mandel, who's a super welterweight, or middleweight in this case. And Jake LaMotta, another middleweight. And then Vic Delacurti, okay? So we have to look at middleweight and also welterweight at the same time. Let's see what we get. So here, looking at these here, let's just look at it. We got McDaniels. What else we got here? That's about it, huh? At welterweight, I think it's only McDaniels, if I'm not mistaken. Ferrone, we have Bell, Costner. All right. McDaniels. Yeah. So McDaniels makes it 10. McDaniels makes it 10. And let's see what's happening at middleweight here. Vic Delacurti, that's 11. Basora is 12. Okay, we already have LaMotta. He didn't face Holman or Burley. I don't think you want to mess with those guys. But anyway, it's all good. It's all good. It's all good. The important thing is we are at 12. Okay? Let's go to 1946. 1946. 1946 was a very prolific year for him. He really fought his butt off. All right. Remember, this guy, he fights at middleweight and he also fights at welterweight. It's crazy. It's just crazy schedule. So he fights Dick Clark at middleweight, Tony Riccio at middleweight, O'Neal Bell at middleweight, Cliff Beckett at middleweight, Sammy Angut, he fights at welterweight. So he rematches Sammy Angut again. Izzy Genazzo, he loves this guy. Izzy Genazzo, he fights at middleweight, Freddie Flores, middleweight, Freddie Wilson at middleweight, Norman Rubio at welterweight, Joe Curcio at middleweight, Vinnie Vines at middleweight, Sidney Miller at middleweight, Ozzie Harris at middleweight, and Cecil Hudson at welterweight. All right, you can see he's growing more and more into a middleweight, right? And we got a couple more here. He fights for the championship. He fights Artie Levine at middleweight, and then he fights Tommy Bell for the championship at welterweight. So we're gonna check out all these guys and see where they are at. We're at number 12 now with 12 top 10 fighters. Let's go. So there's a lot of middleweight fights. So let's see what we have here. We have Holman Williams, Charlie Burley. We know he didn't face them. He faced Jake LaMotta. He didn't fight Graciano or Zidane. B.B. Washington, no. Aaron Tiger Wade, no. George Henry, no. Jimmy Edgar, no. And Bert Lytle, no. He didn't face any of these top guys. Let's look at the welterweight. Didn't face Freddie Cochran. Didn't face Jimmy Doyle. Did he face Tippy Larkin? I have to go check. Freddie Archer, no, I don't remember him. Nick Moran, no. Arthur Danner, Joey Greco, Sammy Angut, he did face him again, but that you can't count that. Tony Janiro and Chuck Hunter. I don't recall him facing any of these guys. Let's just have a look at it again. He did face Cecil Huston, Ossie Harris. There's no Hudson or Harris there. Okay, just checking. Vinnie Vines, Joe Curcio, I didn't see him. Norman Rubio, Freddie Wilson, Freddie Flores, Izzy Genazzo, Sammy Angut. None of these names, okay? So he didn't even face, Tommy Bell is not even listed there. or nor R.T. Levine. So, still at 12. All right, none of the names are there. Let's keep it going. So we're looking at 1947. He becomes world champion, and now he's facing people as world champion in 1947. He faces Bernie Miller, who is not, this is not probably defending for a title because he's clearly a middleweight here. Freddie Wilson, again another middleweight fight. Eddie Finazzo, Georgie Abrams, all these are middleweight. Jimmy Doyle, Jimmy Doyle is the first. This is a welterweight fight. This is the guy he killed, Jimmy Doyle. Then you have Sammy Secret, who's this is also a middleweight fight. Flashy Sebastian, California Jackie Wilson's at middleweight. Billy Nixon, Chuck Taylor, Ozzie Harris is in 1948. So let's look to see if any of these guys are here. Well, we have a Tommy Bell right here at the end of 1946 into 1947. He has Tommy Bell, a #1 guy. I guess he's pumped up there because he faced Sugar Ray Robinson. Tippy Larkin, did he face him? Bew Jack, Tony Gennaro, Johnny Greco. I think he faced Johnny Greco, didn't he? No? No. Just Jimmy Doyle. Jimmy Doyle is the only other one. And Chuck Taylor. Jimmy Doyle, Chuck Taylor. So, Jimmy Doyle's there, so that's 13. There's no Chuck Taylor. Okay, cool. In the middleweight division, let's see here. I don't see anybody here that he faced. Oh yes, he faced Georgie Abrams. He faced Georgie Abrams in a close fight. Georgie Abrams, of course, Georgie Abrams is a huge dude, so I guess that's why it's a split decision. They say the verdict for Robinson was accompanied by a solid round of boos. I think they thought Georgie Abrams beat him. And Jimmy Doyle was 13. So Georgie Abrams is 14. What else we got here? That's it. 14. Alright. Okay. Moving on. 1948. 1948 was an interesting year for him. In 1948, he faced Ozzie Harris. Ozzie Harris. Okay. Ozzie Harris. And there is no Ozzie Harris, of course. It's not even for a title fight. It's a middleweight Ozzie Harris. He also faced Henry Brim. Henry Brim was a good fighter. Then Bernard Ducousin. This was a welterweight fight. Kid Gavilan was at middleweight. Bobby Lee, middleweight. Young Gene Buffalo was in 1949. So, Kid Gavilan, Bobby Lee, Bernard Ducousin, and Henry Brim. And let's see what we got. What we got here. Bernard Ducousin, that's 14. That's about it there. Let's see, in terms of middleweight fights, who do we have? Let's see here. Do you see Henry Brim anywhere? Not even Kid Gavilan was top 10. So you have 14. Henry Brim, maybe. Henry Brim. We had Ducousin, which was 14. Bobby Lee. Okay. So let me have a look at it again. And nope, that's about it. So that's 14 people so far. 14 top 10 fighters. But you know, time checks along. So 1949. And in 1949, he had quite a lot of fights. More than 10 at least. Maybe 12 or 13. You have Young Gene Butler. Again, this is a middleweight fight. Henry Brim, Bobby Lee, Don Lee, Earl Turner, Freddie Flores, all middleweight fights. Cecil Hudson. Then he has a welterweight fight against Kid Gavilan. Alright, in 1949. Then he faces Steve Bellois, Henry Evans, Charlie Dudson, Don Lee. Let's see what else we got here. And Vern Lester. So Vern Lester is the last one. Okay? Alright, so let's see if any of those guys are there. Let's look in the middleweight division. And I don't know. Did we have any of those guys in middleweight that he faced? The answer is no. Charlie Dutson is there, isn't he? No. All right. I saw Steve Benoit. Yeah, there it is. Steve Benoit. So that's 15. Steve Benoit was up in there. So there you go. That's about it. Burt Lytell, maybe? No. Okay. And at welterweight, did we have Kid Gavilan finally? Yes, we did. So Kid Gavilan at welterweight in 1949. Okay. That's about it. All right. So from 15 to 16, you have 16 names there. 16 names in 1949. Let's move on. 1950. 1950 was a very good year for him. Actually, it was his last year at welterweight. 1950, he really fought a lot, though. He fought a hell of a lot in 1950. Whew, that's crazy. So 1950 fought a lot of middleweight fights, but let's just try and roll it down to the last 1950 fight here. Okay, so first he faced George La Rover. This was all middleweight. Al Moby, Aaron Wade, Jean Walzak, George Costner again, Cliff Beckett. All these are middleweight fights. Ray Barnes, Robert Villamain, Charlie Fasuri was a welterweight fight. Yeah, Jose Basara again at middleweight. Billy Brown, Joe Rindon, Bobo Olson. He's fighting for the middleweight title, Pennsylvania middleweight title. And then he has Josh Stock, Luke Van Dam, Jean Walzak, Robert Villamain, Hans Stretch, and that's it. Okay? So let's see. I don't know if any of these names will pop up. We'll have to have a look and see. So let's start looking at the middleweights. It's mostly middleweights we're looking at. And in 1950, see, there's Robert Villamain. Okay? So that'll be 17. Definitely saw that name. And that's about it. Okay? That's for middleweights. And in welterweights, Charlie Fasuri is there. So that's 18. Who else we got here? Is that it? I see George Costner as well. George Costner was classed as a welterweight, but he faced him. So that would be, where are we at? 19. So that's 19 names. That's pretty impressive. 19 names. And this cat, man, he was fighting a lot of middleweights at that point in time. So he moves up to middleweight. Let me just see something. Didn't Bobo Olson? Oh no, he wasn't there. Okay. All right. So the next thing he does is he faces in 1951 now. We're in 1951. And the next thing he faces is the middleweight champion in 1951. He squares off against... Where are we? Okay. He squares off against Jake LaMotta, 1951. So he faces Jake LaMotta in 1951. And he's officially at middleweight. He's the middleweight champion. He then faces Holly Mims. It's a good fight. Don Ellis, Kit Marcel, Jean Wines, Jean Lebrun, Jean Walzak, Jurek Hecht, Cyril Denois. Randy Turpin beats him. He faces back. Randy Turpin beats him. All of that happens in 1951. Okay, so he beats Jake LaMotta, which is 19. He faces Randy Turpin, that's 20, and beats him. And so that's it. 20 names in 1951. Again, very impressive. Very impressive. That matches what Floyd Mayweather had right there. Now in 1952, by the way, he beat all these guys. In 1952, he faces Bobo Olson, then Rocky Graciano. Then he goes up and he faces Joey Maxim. So he really tries his hand now at light heavyweight. So this guy's crazy, man. He fought lightweight champions, right? He fought welterweight champions, and now middleweight champions, and now he's trying to fight light heavyweight champions. This is awesome. He loses to Joey Maxim, and then he retires for 3 years. All right, so he really only had 3 fights that year. Okay, his 3 fights are Bobo Olson, Rocky Graciano, and Joey Maxim. Okay, So let's see here. Bobo Olson. Okay, Bobo Olson is not there. Rocky Graciano is there. That's 21 names. He beats Rocky Graciano. All right. So he comes back out in 1955. Okay. And in 1955, he fights a number of fights, as you can see. He fights Joe Rindon, Ralph Tiger Jones. He loses to him. Johnny Lombardo, Ted Ola, God Panther, Rocky Castellini. So he beat Rocky Castellini by split decision. It was pretty close. Actually, Rocky Castellini, as you can see, knocked him down. He beat Bobo Olson to become the world middleweight champion. Fought him again and beat him again. So, So in 1955, he beat Bobo Olson, right? So let's have a look at that. What we got here? Rocky Castellini, that is 22. Who else we got here? Bobo Olson, that's 23. And that's about it. Okay. See, Holly Mims didn't face Holly Mims that year. So 23 names so far. Alright, so in 1956, right here. In 1956, he rematched Bobo Olson. He knocked him out. He faced Bob Provici, and then he was beaten by Gene Fullmer, but he beat back Gene Fullmer, knocking him out in the 5th round. Oh, I'm sorry. Nope. In 1956, he only had 2 fights. He fought Bobo Olson and Bob Provici. Okay, he only had 2 fights in 1956. Bobo Olson and Provici was not here. Okay, so he's still at 23. And then in 1957, he faced Gene Fullmer. As you can see, he only had 3 fights in 1957. He fought Gene Fullmer, rematched him, and then faced Carmen Basilio and lost his title. So it doesn't matter. It was 1957. He beat Gene Fullmer, right? So that's 24. And then he faced Carmen Basilio and lost his title. Okay. In 1958, so it's 1958, he beat Carmen Basilio, which is 25. All right, and let's see what else he did. After he beat, that was it. That was all he did. He beat Carmen Basilio. That was 1958. Okay, 25 names. All right. And then in 1958, oh, we dealt with 1958, Carmen Basilio. Yes, okay. In 1959, he beat Bob Young. He was still world champion, but he fought basically a super lightweight or a light heavyweight and beat him, and Bob Young. Then he lost the title to Paul Pender. He would never have the title again. And after that, that's pretty much it. So in 1959, he beat Bob Young. That was all. It was 1 fight he had that year. And Bob Young was not a top anything, so we can forget about him. And in 1960, he lost the title to Paul Pender. Okay? Lost the title to Paul Pender. So, and he faced Gene Fullmer. Alright? And then in 1961, he fought 4 times, it looks like here. He faced Gene Fullmer, lost again. He fought Wilf Greaves, beat him, and Denny Moyer. He beat Denny Moyer and Al Hauser and Wilf Greaves again. So, let's see. Denny Moyer on the charts? No, Denny Moyer was not. Okay, so in 1961, he beat Denny Moyer. Denny Moyer would go on to become the super welterweight champion, by the way. In 1962, he lost to Denny Moyer, beat Bobby Lee, Phil Moyer, and Terry Downs. Lost to Terry Downs, Diego Infantes, Jorge Sestao, Ralph, and that's it. Okay, and most of those other guys. Let's see here. Danny Moy was on the list, but he lost to him, sadly. And who was the other guy? Terry Downs, maybe. You got Terry Downs somewhere there? Nope. Alright, so basically he didn't beat anybody else. This is 25 names so far. Then he goes on to face and beat Ralph Dupas. I don't even know what weight class this is. He's much bigger than Ralph Dupas in 1963. So in 1963, Ralph Dupas is not on this list. So move on here. But Ralph Dupas becomes a world champion as well later on. In 1963 also he loses to Joey Giardello, who was not a world champion yet, but he was on the list as you saw. And then he fought a lot of easy guys. He never really fought anybody of note after that. Okay? So in 1963, Joey Giardello is the man. And in 1964, you got all these names here. He didn't beat any of those guys. So, at the end of the day, Sugar Ray Robinson's career, amazingly, Sugar Ray Robinson was able to beat 25, we're talking beat here, beat 25 top 10 opponents in his career. Okay? Which is pretty amazing. And remember, the other thing that you got to bear in mind is Sugar Ray Robinson was fighting at middleweight and then he'd come down to welterweight to fight. He also fought at lightweight and he beat some lightweight champions, current lightweight champions and former lightweight champions. And he also beat some former welterweight champions and so on early in his career. So these are all good things. I mean, when you look at his resume, it's pretty impressive. It's pretty impressive. Now, the only problem I had with it, but it's a different time, is that he had just so many fights. So many fights that sometimes were just unnecessary. And then other fights were really good. Like some of those middleweight fights were really, really good fights. And even though the guys weren't top 10 opponents, they were really good fights. You know, like Jose Basora, like Georgie Abrams, like Jose Napoles. I mean, these are good boxers. I mean, these are very good boxers. Marty Servo, and so we can go on and on. So they may not have been top 10 guys, but they were really good fighters, right? And then he had the journeyman, which really didn't matter. Why I say they don't matter, I'll show you why they don't matter. If you're dispatching a guy in 1 round, 2 rounds, 3 rounds, that guy is just way below your level, like this guy here. Gene Hurt, okay? Yeah, he comes from Germany. He's got a nice record. Oh, this was a disqualification. Sorry, my bad. Let me give you another one. But he basically stopped him in the 2nd round. Don Ellis, right? He's a journeyman, yeah. But the point is, if you stop a guy in the 1st round, generally speaking, not always. You know, Peter Quillen versus Danny Jacobs. We saw Peter Quillen get stopped in the 1st round. It doesn't mean anything. It just means he was cold. I'm not talking about that. This guy, you know, I can show you a guy who was stopped in the 1st round by Sugar Ray Robinson, who he was a very good, in fact, twice it happened, and he was a very good fighter. But it's just, you know, his name was Sugars, but, you know, dude used to beat names, okay? But when it comes to Sugar Ray Robinson, Robinson had his number, and he would stop him early every single time, right? But guys like Cliff Beckett, and O'Neal Bell, a Dave Clark, you know, some of these guys just, you know, George Costner, that's the guy I'm talking about. He got stopped in the 1st round. That's tough, man. Both times. He was a very good fighter, George Costner. Georgie Abrams was a good fighter as well. But, you know, some people, you know, they get knocked out. This is what it is. You know what I mean? Freddie Cabral, I mean, come on now. It wasn't a good, I mean, he wasn't on Ray Robinson's level at all. Zanelli was a good fighter, okay? Another good fighter was Dilly Curti. Wasn't bad. He wasn't a great fighter. He was as his record shows, he was a journeyman, okay? But he wasn't a bad fighter. And really, you can go watch the fight if you want. All right? But my point anyway is, if he's putting you away in the 1st round, You know, somebody says, "Oh, it's a lot of experience and stuff." No, 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 no. Some of those fights those fights are just padded fights, man. You know, dude used to fight a lot a year just to stay sharp, I guess, instead of just doing all the sparring. So I think that's what was up. But some of them also were touring events for people to know who Sugar Ray Robinson was. But I don't think that would fly in this day and age. Like, they wouldn't want you just beating guys for sake. I mean, look at this. Look at this, right? Dude came up from lightweight and fought Danny Garcia. Danny Garcia was a super lightweight, right? They picked, what's the guy's name? I forgot his name. Who came up from, I think it was either super featherweight or lightweight, right? I forgot the dude's name. That Danny Garcia knocked out, right? And they said it was a cherry pick. Now, Ray Robinson be doing that. He pulling up lightweights all the time and fighting them. So what? I mean, back in the day, there was no excuse for you to fight another dude. You know, but today, it's a little bit different, all right? Anyway, that's besides the point. The point is that Sugar Ray Robinson, he has 25 top 10 opponents that he faced. That's really the most important thing. How many fights he had? 200 fights. Some of those fights wasn't necessary. Some of them was rematches and all of that. All of that is true. After all is said and done, that is true. But it doesn't change the fact that he had 25 legitimate, at least top 10 opponents by the Ring magazine. These are facts, okay? Floyd Mayweather had 20. When you're talking about value for your money, Mayweather had value for his money. I mean, you got 49 fights and you got 20 top 10 opponents. That's excellent. That's ridiculously well. Sugar Ray Robinson got the numbers. 25 top 10 opponents out of 200 fights. Don't sound that great because, you know, it's 200 fights. And people be scratching their heads like, dude, why are you fighting so regular every year? You know, I don't get that part. But, hey, he started to stop doing that when he became world champion. He didn't fight as regular. He started looking for more higher quality opposition as well. So, you know, it happens. I mean, it's just that I think back in the day, it was just a little bit more elaborate. Like, you find a prospect, even a top-level contender, may fight much more regularly than a world champion because you're trying to find the best to fight against. You know, people talk about the gruel grind of beating bums all the time as you go on tours. That is true. It's grinding, but it's unnecessary grinding. And that's why boxing today, guys don't fight 40, 50 fights a year. They don't fight 20 fights a year. They don't fight 10 fights a year. They look for meaningful fights to fight. You hear them all the time. You listen to Demetrius Andrade, he was waiting around for a meaningful fight because he was at the level where he should get meaningful fights. And I think I try to explain this to people, but they don't seem to understand. Certain old school practices are not practiced today because it's not necessary. And so boxing has evolved to allow for convenience, and also instead of having somebody just throw them in the deep and then next thing their career is wrecked by some fighter who has knocked them out or they're dead, right? You spar in a much more controlled environment. You're still building the skill sets. As an amateur, you get now to deal with professionals. Sparring's where that happens, okay? So I try to explain this to people, and they're so stupid. Some of these people are so stupid. They're like, no, the real thing is really more important than sparring. And I'm like, maybe for the champion, maybe for the dude who's sharpening his skills, but for the other guy who gets knocked out, it's a detriment to him, okay? You get knocked the spark out a couple times, then you're going to be no good for yourself, which is what basically happened to some of these fighters. You go and you look at their resume, they had 2 or 3 fights professionally, and it's over. Their career is over. So boxing, they considered both the person who is being used as fodder, and they considered the person who shouldn't even be in that fight because he's outclassing the other opponent. And they said to themselves, you know what? Why don't they have a controlled environment where they spar? And amateurs can come and get experience at the same time. So it's controlled. You have headgear, you're protected, you know, that kind of stuff. So that's what happened. So that people would benefit and learn better than just throwing them into the deep. You know, you're thrown to a world champion, he damages you permanently or you die, and then what benefit is it to you? Okay. But having said that, remember I'm talking about boxing, right? And I'm gonna do a video on the evolution of boxing, so don't worry about it, guys. I'm gonna do it. But Sugar Ray Robinson, 25 top tier opponents. Okay, it doesn't say everything because, like I said before, some of the opponents he faced were really quality opponents, but they never really were in the top 10. Okay. All right. On that note, you guys have a great one.